Alright, that's us. Let's live. Hold on. Uh, let me pull up my stream so I can link it places. I gotta learn to do that. Like, to remember. Or like set up a bot. There's bots that do that things. Uh-oh, is it not working? No, it should be working, I think, maybe. Yeah, so I think kind of the game plan for this going in um, is I'm gonna look and try and just look at the tier list and break down like what I think constitutes a perfect team. And first, we're gonna kind of look at Loopy's, just because he built one yesterday, um, and it kind of got me thinking and got me interested in what I kind of think the perfect team would be. And so I built a couple. You'll kind of see them across the top. I'll switch through them. I also got the tier list pulled up. I want to see if there's like a I guess tampered with tier list. Maybe if I sign out as a coach and like go back in, that'll do it. Um, just so I don't have to seal it to red. I mean, it's not a huge deal. Control F, FPL. Do 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 do. Anyways, so yeah, I guess with that we can kind of get started, and that's basically my plan for this stream. It'll probably only be like an hour and a half or so. Now it's not working. I'm just gonna go back to the red tier list because I ain't nobody got time to wait for that, and it can load. While I can talk about Loopy's team. So yeah, yesterday we kind of started doing AMAs in the FPL server, which I'll probably sign up for one eventually, but I don't know. So I kind of asked the question, what do you think the perfect team was? And this is to Loopy, who has the really cool rain team we've talked about. And so this is what he kind of constructed. I don't want to dive too in depth in the thought process. I can put it in like a. Actually, I can just read it to you. What's it called? It should still be in the AMA answers section. But basically, the summary of it was Mew, Aerodactyl, and Komodo were kind of his locks to start. Let's see if I can pull up on a new tab and just put it in here. All right, so yeah, this was his first I guess step in the process. Basically, Mew, Aerodactyl, two great Pokemon. I 100% agree that those two probably could definitely be part of a perfect team. And so from there on, wanted to kind of look into it. I think he was building it off of what he said, his season 4 team. And so Mew, Mega Arrow, and then he said he loved Komodo, Decidueye, and Piloswine on that team. I know he's a big Piloswine guy, so that's probably why it's on the team. And from there, first thing I'm noticing is like, all right, solid. Team's a bit knockoff weak right now, but I mean, Komodo can switch into it. Uh, so then it kind of comes down to what you do with the rest of the team. It moves on to this, which ends up adding Umbreon, which I will stand by, won't be on a perfect draft league team, because I think Umbreon always has that issue of, yes, it can stall in front of anything, but it's so weak to anything with taunt. Like if you taunt an Umbreon, it literally has nothing on you if you can eat a foul play. So if you're a special attacker or not weak to dark or like resisted to dark, you're literally just and have taunt, which isn't a ton of Pokemon, but is enough where it's a noticeable difference. Or if you're like a steel type or anything that can't be toxic, you really have nothing to worry about with Umbreon. And so for that reason, I just can't see Umbreon on a perfect team. I know it's annoying to deal with, but yeah. And then Toxicity is another Pokemon I personally don't like, just being really ground weak and dying to any stray ground move that you switch into. Rabombi is interesting because Mega Arrow on webs, like I guess this team can kind of use webs, but it doesn't really need it. And then to wrap it up, I did like the Starmie pickup, and I'll always kind of like the Starmie pickup. It goes Starmie, Magmar, and Berserker, and I just to me the perfect draft can't really, and I'll go. I can't say can't have Berserker as the only steal, because that was my original reaction because I was like, you gotta have a better steel. Like steel types are like one of the most crucial parts to team building. Um, but if Berserker is your like go-to steel, I don't know if I'm super confident in that team. Going really well. So that was like my first analysis, and I was like, all right, what can beat this team? And Pokemon came to mind is Weavile. With Triple Axle, it gets multi-hit moves, so you can't really run Sash or Bombi and like beat it that way. Ugh. And Ice Shard at +2 is gonna blow back Mega Arrow. Not blow back, but do a lot. Um, and it outspeeds everything else and hits it super effectively, minus Umbreon and Piloswine. And I guess Berserker, but you can run Fighting Coverage, which hits all of those Pokemon. And then I guess Magmar, but Magmar's not liking the knockoff. So at that point, a +2 Weavile just sweeps through the team. And obviously, you can try and prevent it from getting +1. There's a plethora of Pokemon, like Decidueye, you can't really stay in. Mew, you can kind of stay in. You can run like Colbert, Body Press, Wisp. There's like fun sets that you can run. And to get around it, it's not but again, like that's the first thing that I've noticed. I'm like, all right, Weavile, that's why this team can't be the perfect team. And so I kind of want to build on that. And that's kind of where this whole like I guess stream idea started. Is I just kind of wanted to look at different teams. And so going on from this Mew Mega Arrow team, I built my own. And so this is his. I have it in here. It's solid, weak to fast, dark, and ice moves. Starmie is a weird ice resist. That's the TLDR of it. Starmie being your ice resist, because Magmar being a bad Pokemon, Berserker being a bad Pokemon. No, I mean bad loosely. It's a relatively not super usable Pokemon. And I guess Piloswine is a resist, but it's really weak to knockoff. It's also not a great Pokemon. Like ideally, you want to be able to bring those tier 1s and tier 2s, and not have to be relying on this as your ice resist. Especially when stuff like Mega Arrow, Komodo, Decidueye are all really weak to ice. So yeah, so from there I took my own spin on it. I did like Mew, Komodo, Mega Arrow, but I think we needed a better ice resist. So Primarina was the first Pokemon I kind of added to that team. And Salazzle I thought was a great tier 3. With here, from this team, I was like, all right, Toxicity, I don't necessarily love it, but I do think Ground and Poison's on a good fit on the best, I guess, in their best draft league team you can come up with. So I wanted that, so I went Salazzle. And as a fire type, which I just don't like Magmar personally, I feel like you got to do better tier 4s. You got to abuse that tier 4. So I kind of combined those two things and dropped the electric type for Salazzle. It also gives that toxic spread that you can just throw around everywhere. It's just overall solid Pokemon. And then Primarina gives you that water, bulkier water that functions as a much better ice resist than a Starmie. Because while Starmie can be bulky, I think offensive Starmie is a little better. And I don't know, Primarina is just my preferred ice resist. And then I went and upgraded the Steel. And kind of turned Piloswine and Berserker into one Pokemon in Steelix. And so that's kind of why I think Steelix just makes more sense there, because you're just it's just a little bit of roll compression, right? And then if you want that Rapid Spin, I grabbed Rapid Spinner, right? And that kind of takes up Kamala's spot of it. And so a lot of these picks up here are just basically going out and replacing these two Pokemon, and Toxicity and Starmie. So that's kind of what I tried to do there. And from that point on, it was like filling speed tiers. Salazzle filled the great speed tier that anything that wants to run. Let me rephrase this. Anything that can prevent Mega Arrow from going Adamant can't run Adamant. Or anything that can't, like for example, Coco. That's really what I'm trying to get at. Coco can run Adamant on this team, or can't run Adamant on this team because of Salazzle. And so that Salazzle's fast enough. But for example, Mega Lopunny, it might be able to run Adamant on Salazzle, but if you run Adamant Mega Lopunny, I can run Adamant Mega Aerodactyl. Whereas normally I couldn't. So it almost baits allowing you to run Adamant Mega Arrow, which I really liked when building a team. And so then we kind of get to our like free points and what I wanted to do with those. And then so Zarude was the first thing I saw, and it kind of turned both of Loopy's tier 3s into one Pokemon, where you lose the removal, you get a Dark and Grass type, which again, two solid typings kind of fill out that I guess void almost. And yeah, it also gets that momentum, which this team has some of. But the thing with momentum on this team is it's like, all right, Toxicity and Starmie definitely have it. Flip, Turn, and Volt Switch can be run. Rabombi's not really getting that opportunity to like U-turn that much. I feel like most of the time you're better off, like it's usually a stack Pokemon. You're usually kicking Sticky Webs, Stun Spore, Moonblast, kind of a lead, Suicide. Maybe you run U-turn, but you're not really getting a chance to click it. Berserker gets it, but it's not a great U-turner. Decidueye gets it, and it's a solid U-turner, but Zarude also gets that and is faster, filling that speed tier gap between Salazzle and Mew we have on the other team. And then Mew's not really running momentum. it's got moveslot Slenderman as it is, so you don't want to necessarily fill that slot with momentum. And so I gave it a really reliable U-turner and a bulky grass and dark type that's not necessarily weak to status and just taunted. Um, so I really liked Zarude. I liked Scolipede here. Uh, I know I'm doubling up on the grounded poison, but this one's not weak to ground types. So I think I was okay with that. Especially when you're psychic resist. You got Mew, you have Zarude. Rotom's an offensive threat to psychics. And then Steelix is resisting a lot of psychic types as well. So I'm not too worried about psychic types, so I'm okay with doubling up on poisons here. And I really like this just because it takes some of the spikes pressure off Mew. The only special hazards that this team had was webs, and while that's a solid hazard, and I think it fits well kind of with Toxicity here, the rest of the team doesn't necessarily thrive off webs. Like even Starmie, like Analytic is one thing it does, and so if you're running a slow Starmie and a bulky Starmie, and you still want to get that analytic damage, webs isn't going to help you there, but it is a good spinner. But yeah, so that's your only really special hazard unless you want to run a hazard Mew. And personally, I'm not a big fan of hazard Mew. Using it this season, I feel like it's much better when it's not forced into that role, and you can run hazards on a Gran, or in this case, a Scolipede. Um, and so at this point, I feel like all of Mew's roles are filled. Mew doesn't need to necessarily be a defensive dark type check. You have Kamo, or not a dark type check, a defensive fighting type check. You have like a Primarina, you have your Kamos, Scolipede's like another resist, Rotom's on here. Just stuff like that, right? So Mew isn't forced into these roles, and it can basically be whatever it needs to for that matchup. Which for me is generally going to be a Dragon Dance, Nasty Plot, Combine. I feel like when those Mew sets are successful, a Mew is most effective. And I do think the Cosmic Power, Stored Power, Body Press, that whole set is also great. But yeah, that's I feel like more matchup dependent. Whereas the Calm Mind, the Nasty Plot, the Dragon Dance, the SD, those sets really thrive on a team where all the other roles are filled. So if you want to run a defensive Mew because you like offensive Kamo, you're choosing another offensive sweeper, and you're not missing out on something otherwise. Alright, so that was kind of my attempt at a Loopy's rebuild. I did Cryogonal as another spinner, and got Ice Resist, because this team's Ice Resist currently, we're Primarina. And when you draft Steelix as your steal, you lose out on that Ice Resist for that type. Salazzle and Primarina, which are solid Ice Resists, but Cryogonal is especially eating every Ice Beam ever. And then Rotom is good ground resist, as well as just being another solid Ghost Electric kind of momentum type Pokemon. So yeah, that was kind of my attempt at doing Loopy's team. There's probably some holes I'm missing, and if you have any, please point them out. But yeah, so that was my first thing. And so from there, I kind of wanted to go Mega Zamtorn. Mostly Mega Zam, because I think Mega Zam is the most broken Pokemon that FPL allows. So I was like, alright, Mega Zam, that's the start of the team. I don't know why. I guess I was doing Mega 20 when I was formatting it for this part of the team. But yeah, so I started with Mega Zam, and that's where I went for building it. And after that, I kind of filled down in speed tiers. I was like, all right, what's the next fastest Pokemon I want on my speed tier? And that was Torn. I hadn't used Torn yet, and I was like, all right, this Pokemon's another top 5 in draft Pokemon. So putting that with Mega Zam has to be, like, ridiculous. Torn can knock off some items, U-turn, defog, get rid of hazards. Also brings that great offensive pressure. And so now it's like, what else do I need to make Mega Zam succeed? Because Mega Zam's big issues are priority, which again, I didn't draft Psychic Terrain here because I personally don't love using two Psychic types. I sometimes struggle to fit one Psychic type on a team. But yeah, so Mega Zam, it struggles with priority, which I guess this team doesn't necessarily have a true workaround. It has great priority in and of itself, and some good resists priority, but it doesn't necessarily have that Psychic Terrain. But what's it called? It needs something to deal with Dark types, and Steel types. Those are the two big things Zam's going to struggle with. Because those are your psychic resists. And so the next thing I went with is basically your fighting type is almost necessary, a good fighting type. And Infernape gave that speed tier, it gave rocks, not to mention it can also help break seals on the fire side. So I really just think Infernape fits really solidly here, and Infernape Tornadus has had multitude of success in FPL. We can see through Rise runs. Just a great combo. And then on top of Mega Zam, your offensive pressure is out the wazoo. And then just to add on to that, I went through the Regidrago route. Obviously, this team needs a way to, at this point, I was like, this team needs a way to break through fairies. Because if you're going to put Regidrago on a team, this team's kind of all about that offensive pressure. Dragon Energy does ridiculous amounts of damage to anything that's not, a fairy type. So add a fairy killer. Infernape kind of functions as like a pseudo fairy killer with that gunk shot, forcing Kevia berries on a lot of fairy types. Which I think is really nice. Tornadus also gets Sludge Wave, so you're getting Clefable is when I think of a fairy type, what I generally envision. And so both of these Pokemon carrying that poison coverage, uh, means that fairy types are going to have a hard time with this team, especially when you have a Drapion. And at the end of the day, I was like, Scissor, that's the Pokemon. Gives great momentum, so I can get that momentum into Mega Zam. And that's another thing that both of these Pokemon have. They both get U-turn. So you can U-turn into Mega Zam, and Regen's obviously awesome for that. And getting momentum into Regidrago as well. Just basically keeping the team and getting in your threats. Diance's a lovely Gloomon. I think that's the best way. I think that's the best way to describe it. It gets your rocks. It's a reliable rocker every week. Obviously, it's got that steel weakness, but again, we have Infernape, we have Scissor, we have Rotom Wash, which I'll talk about. So steel isn't a huge issue for this team. And then ground, obviously, we have one of the best ground resistance in the game in Torn. Our immunities, like it's just one of the better flying types. So I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, I really like Mega Diancie, or not Mega Diancie, regular Diancie here, because just as a rocker and a solid defensive fairy, can do both mixed. It's a mixed defender, and just kind of a Gloomon for this team. Drapion kind of came in as a knockoff T-Spike, opposing Psychic Check. It's another pawn that I think is really good for its tier. As far as tier 4 goes, I think it's one of the better tier 4s, and I really like it on teams. I find myself using it when I don't know what else to do in a tier 4. So that's kind of where I went with this route. Licky Licky, we were kind of talking about it, but I think just as a normal type, a solid Ghost Resist to pair with Drapion, a great Wish support for Regidrago so it can get back in. Diancie as well, just a nice another Cleric in case you're worried about T-Wave spam. But yeah, so that's kind of the tiers. And then the classic Black and White OU Volturn core. That's kind of what I decided I wanted to go with 3 points. Obviously, you can see Leafeon and Stunfisk, Galarian Stunfisk, which are again solid picks. But in all reality, I think Scissor and Rotom Wash is really where this team takes it to the next level. Because Volturn, as you probably know, and if you don't know, it's basically you just click U-turn and Volt Switch, infinitely putting your Pokemon in a bad matchup. Because the Pokemon that Rotom Wash is going to Volt Switch on, if you want to try and switch your ground type to stop it, it's going to hit it with the Hydro Pump. So you're forced to go into like a Grass type, which is resisting the Electric move. Which your Grass types, once you Volt Switch, you go into Scissor. Grass types generally don't have a fire coverage move without HP Fire, and U-turn is doing a significant amount of damage. So you get in this endless cycle of swapping back and forth and back and forth until your opponents have been weared out enough where a Bullet Punch is going to kill, or you go into Mega Zam and it cleans, or Regidrago comes in and picks off a skill with a Scarf set, and just stuff like that. And Torn fits really nicely into this core as well, being another mon with U-turn and a great defogger. So if you can't get the rocks up, then the Volturn core comes in and just it's going to do the U-turn Volt switching for free without getting any chip. And so I think having a lot of momentum on the Mega Sand team is crucial, as well as having ways to deal with Dark types, which Mega Scissor, or not Mega Scissor, but Scissor is another way of doing. And then to round it out, this team didn't really necessarily need a Dracovish check, but I was like, you know what, a nice bulky Grass, Leafeon. I've always kind of wanted to try it on a draft tree. I think knockoff's always awesome. Just getting rid of Assault Vest, Boots, stuff like that. That can be annoying. Leech Seed, Synthesis, Yawn, Wish, Protect, yada yada yada. It has significantly higher defense than you realize, because I mean it's just not a mon that you see very often. But I think it's a really solid value pick out of tier 5, and that kind of same goes with Galarian Stunfisk. This team already had a steal, but that steal is a little bit more on the offensive side, so I wanted a bit more of a defensive steal, and as you can see, we didn't really have a ground type up to this point, which is why I don't necessarily think this team is the perfect team. Stunfisk being your only ground type means certain matchups are going to be rough, but at the same time, Galarian Stunfisk, I feel like it's highly underrated as a rocker, especially when our rockers on this team are naturally going to be a low tier. Like, unless I want to run Infernape rocks, I'm going to run Diancie or Galarian Stunfisk every week, and that allows me to pick a momentum core to go from there. So this team was my first attempt at building one. As I go on, I think I like my teams more and more. But the main idea with this is get a bunch of momentum, get Mega Zam going, and abuse that to the most. And how to do the most. And I think Torn's kind of the same vein. Like, make sure those nasty plot sweepers just wreck through teams. Because you can knock off Chansey's Eviolite, and then they can actually start breaking them. And Regidrago's another example. I think the big thing I do regret with this team is it's a little weak to steals. And as I said, I think electric types also kind of pose a threat. And then just general as a typing. Because Tornadus is weak to electric, and I guess Regidrago is a resist. But none of my other Pokemon are necessarily weak to it, but they just all don't resist it. So Volt switching is kind of free versus this team, especially since Regidrago doesn't really want to take that chip, so it can do the most with Dragon's Energy. But yeah, so that's kind of my biggest regret with this team. And so moving on to the next team, I was like, all right, let's take a different broken Pokemon, different perspective, and kind of go from there. So for this team, I decided to go with Rain. I know Rain's my favorite playstyle and my favorite way to play draft. Whenever I'm building a team that I'm like want to go in my comfort zone and kind of relax, not necessarily put a ton of time into prep, um, but focus more on my battling, I'll take a Rain team just because you can kind of bring the same couple mons every week. You know you're bringing Pelipper, you know you're bringing Mega Purr, you know you're bringing Kingdra, stuff like that. And so in building this Rain team, first thing I kind of want to look at is all right, Pelipper, Swampert, and Kingdra. Those three I wanted on the team for sure. So from the start, they were there. And so next it was, can I make this team function outside of Rain? And so I looked at speed tiers, and I was like, all right, I need a base 100, and then I need a base like 115, that kind of area. Because Swift Swimmers, I think personally, once you hit, I think you just need a 115 on a Rain team. For me to consider your speed tiers complete. Normally, I like having a Pokemon in that 125 plus range. Um, but if you have a Rain team, those Pokemon naturally hit like a 150, 160 kind of range. And so while it's a bit fast, Adamant's like play into a huge role there. So I'm okay if your fastest Pokemon on a Rain team is in that 115 range, and that's what I kind of went with Raikou. Um, Great Electric type, can spam Thunder now and Weather Ball, which are two things I really think I like about Raikou in particular that make it awesome is having access to that. Obviously, it can run Scald now, which is a little weaker but gets that burn chance as an alternative to it. And while outside of Rain Weather Ball, it's useless, it's going to hit harder, and there's certain matchups where you'll need it more. But yeah, I really do like Raikou on this team. And this is a team very reminiscent of one of my old teams I had in BDFO, or Rise League, or BFDO, one of the two. I don't know the order. And that's kind of why I was like, all right, Jirachi is one of my favorite Rain Mons for two big reasons. One, so Jirachi is a Steel type, only shares two weaknesses with Steels, being a Steel Psychic. It has neutral fighting. And so its weaknesses become Fire, Ground, and then whatever Psychic's weak to. And so in the Rain, it's literally just ground types. And on a Rain team, you generally don't have an issue with ground types when you have Pokemon like Pelipper, who can also not only can hit it with a water move, are immune to ground. You have Pokemons like Mega Pert, which are hitting it with water moves. You have Kingdras, which can drop water moves, Ice Beams, Dracos, and stuff. And so it's really, I think it fits nicely with as a Steel type on this team, whereas a lot of people like tend to go Ferrothorn. That's the most popular route, I would say. And it has a similar thing where it's like fighting types. That's become the same because obviously Pharaoh, while is now just 2 times weak to fire, is significantly better against fire types in the Rain. But as a fighting type, obviously Pelipper still resists that, but your Pert's not resisting fighting. Your Kingdra's not resisting it, and I don't know. I guess not resisting, but like not hitting as hard back on every fighting type. I guess Kingdra gets Hurricane, but and so personally I like Jirachi. It also feels that speed tier, and it can also it's another Pokemon that gets access to Serene Grace Thunder, which is like a 60% chance to para, which can be brutal. Because then your Swift Swim sweepers don't necessarily have to be in Rain to be sweepers. If their fast Pokemon are paralyzed, or even like a Scarfer, like if you're running Scarf versus Rain, that's a very, like, I guess, I wouldn't say a hard counter, but a very good check to Rain. If that thing gets paralyzed, it's no longer outspeeding stuff in Rain. And so I really do like Jirachi in Rain. Obviously, I already talked about Pelipper. Toxicroak kind of comes in here as like a Grass Resist plus Dry Skin. Dry Skin's just a really good ability in Rain. Kind of lets it do its thing. Can break some fairies for you. Stuff like that. It's just a solid Rain Pokemon, and I didn't like any of the Swift Swim Sweepers here. I could have gone Ludicolo. I think Ludicolo should be a tier 4. And same with Dreadnought. I think they're not good enough Swift Swim Sweepers to warrant being that high up. Also give me a fighting type. Yes, that's why Toxicroak's here. Moltres is an interesting one, because generally you don't actually need a fire type on a Rain team. It's generally not recommended. Oh, wait, I have DNC as a tier 4 here. Alright, so this team's a bit... This is why this team probably felt better. But tier 3, and I'm going to have to rework Moltres, and I can do it in front of y'all. But for some reason, I had Diancie as a tier 4. It's a tier 3, and so I guess I can't really run Moltres on this team. But the main reason behind Moltres was just kind of as a flying Pokemon. Just spam flying moves. So we can probably find a Hurricaner in tier 4 that's doing a similar thing. We don't necessarily need the fire typing. The fire typing was just going to be nice as another grass resist, because that's obviously a big issue. And it's also a flying type not weak to freeze dry that can spam some hurricanes. Let's see. I'll just look at hurricane and see if I can pull up a solid flying type I like. Frostmoth's an interesting one. Uh, Honestly, if I did Frostmoth, I'd have to rework Reggie or Regice, which I guess I can do. Honestly, I'll just rework it now. So let's go like that. Let's go Frostmoth instead. Kind of fills that same role Regice did as a specialized type, a great freestyle resist. But it also now has 100% accurate Hurricanes, which I guess it didn't really need, but like it's never gonna hurt to have a 100% accurate Hurricane. Um, so let's see. You're at tier 4. Oh, blip. And then is a tier 5. Uh, I guess honestly, as a tier 5, I could easily go Quillfish. That's the first one that comes to mind. Swift Swimmer, Spikes, T Spikes. I generally don't like playing a hazard game very much when I play Rain. I rather just keep up the offensive pressure, which is another thing Jirachi does awesome with that U-turn. Um, but considering, I'll come with the tier 5 later. We'll just throw in Quillfish for now uh, as a tier 5. Obviously, it's a great Swift Swimmer, gets spikes, and it's definitely functional on range team. It's probably not my favorite, and again, I'll probably rework the team later in the stream if we get to that point. Obviously, you got to watch out for helmets. I think that's the big thing that really slows down Pert is you just click that water move, you're making contact, which means you're taking a ton of helmet chip. So stuff like Pharaoh and Garchomp, and that's the big issue with momentum. Not necessarily the issue with momentum moves, but one of the ways you counter momentum moves is with helmets, just so you're not getting that momentum for entirely free. So you're going to face a lot of helmets when you face with flip turn Pert. Just keep that in mind. I already talked about Raikou, Kingdra, and then Tangrowth. So for Tangrowth, I wanted a grass type, good water resist. If you're going to boost water types moves, you got to have a good water resist. And that's one of the main reasons I think Pharaoh is another way to go on range. I didn't go with it this time because personally I don't like using Pharaoh. And as I talked about earlier, I'm not a big spikes guy on rain. And so I went with the next best rain, or next best grass that didn't rely on synthesis for recovery, and that was Tangrowth. The other one I was kind of looking at is Amoonguss. My issue with the Amoonguss sort of came down to on versus Coco teams. You're not going to be able to get that Spore off, and Coco is one of the big electric types here. And Coco is just a big threat to rain teams in general, just because you're like obviously threatening T-Bolt here. You're running Grass Knot for Pert and Dazzling Gleam for Kingdra, so you're threatening all of those, and you're also significantly faster than a lot of rain teams. And while it can technically beat Coco, it can't Spore in that matchup. And I feel like Spore is not necessarily great on a rain team. And I already had 2 poison types, or 1 poison type at the time. Now 2 with Quillfish. So didn't want to necessarily stack up on that Psychic weakness, even though I have a great Psychic resistant Jirachi. And so Tangrowth is kind of what I went here. It's getting that regen boost. If your opponent has a Sun team for some reason, you can run some Chlorophyll, Rock Slide, Gimmick Set if you're feeling crazy. I'm not going to recommend it, but if it's not like a playoff important matchup, highly recommend it. But yeah, it gets Leech Seed, it gets Knockoff. It had one other thing I was really wanted to point out. No, I guess that must have been it. But yeah, it hits harder, has more of that recovery. It can even Pain Split, which again, not necessarily saying that's a great set. But I guess if you're going up against like a Chansey or something, it could be useful. But yeah, so Tangrowth is my grass, and then I went Licky Licky. It gets Cloud 9, which it might not seem like a great ability, but again, it can function as kind of a water type switch in if your whole team's losing it to it in rain. I don't know what Tangrowth isn't switching into that Licky Licky isn't, but it can also dodge some hurricanes and stuff like that, and thunders that would normally be 100% accurate in the rain with that Cloud 9 ability. And it also can't be talked to, and it's just a great tier 5 in general. So yeah, as you can see, I've used Licky Licky, I think, on back-to-back tier 5 slots. Yeah. So I'm going to probably stop doing that for the rest of the video, or the rest of the stream, because that's kind of a cop-out answer. What's it called? Ollie was talking about it the other day, and I was like, you know what, Licky Licky might actually be really good. Maybe I'm sleeping on it. And after building teams, I was like, I think it's just better than Audino in most cases. You could probably sub it in for Audino in most cases. I tried to build a stall team, and I think it worked better just because of the Oblivious and being able to be taunted, which is a big thing with those bulky fat mons can struggle with, is if you just taunt them, you can just set up in front of them for free. And Licky Licky doesn't have that. So while you can try, it can Dragon Tail, which is just, look at all this coverage. Like, come on. Gets rid of terrain with Steel Roller if you want to. Like, I think it's just a really overall solid and slept on. It gets that Thunder, if you're going crazy, Pump. Dang, this thing has insane coverage. I didn't even realize it was that insane. But no, I think Licky Licky is a really solid pick for this team, just because it can take an 100% accurate Hurricane and make it a not accurate one. And I don't know if I actually dug into why I like Dancing on Rain. Reliable rocker, flying resist. And while it's weak to water, flying resist is huge on a team where your mons aren't naturally resistant to the thing that's getting boosted. Swampert makes electric types significantly more manageable in the rain. Obviously, there's exceptions like the ones with Grass non zero or a Coco. Um, but flying types, your big waters aren't resisting that. Pelipper's not resisting it. Ferrothorn's not resisting it, which is another reason I don't love Ferro in lane. It's a steel that doesn't function as a flying resist. So you have Jirachi as a flying resist on this team, and Diancie just adds that, just so you're not losing to a Hurricane spam on the back end. Raikou also functions as a flying resist, but this Pokemon isn't necessarily bulky enough. 90-100 solid. I don't know. Raikou, I get on the fence and kind of flaw back and forth on. I like it as a Pokemon. I feel like offensively it can be underwhelming at times, and so I feel like you kind of need a run-a-calm mindset, or even specs sometimes. But yeah, it just functions as a really solid flying resist. It's really bulky, and as I talked about in the last, if you can't see, I really like Diancie as a Pokemon, and I think it might be tier 3. I think it's a right fit for it. I think I could argue for it in tier 4, which is kind of a weird thing. It's like you would think a perfect team wouldn't use a Pokemon that I feel like is borderline. And I think that comes down to it just being such a great utility mon and a glue piece for a lot of teams, especially as a low point fairy. Your low point fairy options with Florges and Sylveon all being tier 2 and above, it really comes down to like Diancie's, your Comfeys. Let me see what low tier fairies I was looking at, because I think a lot of my teams end up with Diancie and Comfey if they're not using a high tier fairy. Just because it's like you have a lot of these, like all of these Pokemon are a ridiculous amount of points. So if you're not going a fairy for your Mega and taking one of these three, and Azu's not getting drafted for obvious reasons, Azu syndrome, and you're not going to Tapu or Clef, you can get Hat, which I personally don't love as a fairy, just because it's like it's that weird Gardevoir like typing, which I don't necessarily love, and it's really slow. So unless you're gonna have a really hard Trick Room element on your team, which I feel like is only really good in draft when Melmetal's legal, I don't necessarily think Hat's gonna be a perfect fit for a lot of teams. You have Aromatisse and Alcremie, which Aromatisse is a decent Wish Passer, and I think Aromatisse is the other low tier fairy I think I end up using. But Alcremie can't Wish Patch, doesn't bring a ton of that utility that Aromatisse does. Carbing's garbage, too many points. Offensive, which can work for some teams. I'm not a big fan of offensive fairies. I generally like mine to be at least have a defensive option. Which Gardevoir I guess kind of has. Trace can be a cool ability. I know Lupi's Rain Team has a Gardevoir, so it's definitely an option. Granbull, tier 5 fairy is iffy for me, right? Because I feel like fairy is such an important type in a draft. And to rely on a Pokemon that's such a low tier to be that fairy, to be that dragon resist, to prevent you from getting swept by Outrage, it's going to force it to come into smashes that you wouldn't necessarily want to bring it to. Grinsnall's too many. Klefki's a solid one. I think what it came down for me is I liked a lot of Spikers. I think a lot of these teams ended up with a random Spiker that I didn't actually expect to be on the team. This team technically didn't have a Spiker, so you could definitely make the argument for Klefki over Diancie here. But, for example, I want to say later on, I got a Gren team, and I was like, all right, I like Greninja over Klefki's a Spiker. On this team, it was like, all right, not this, let's see. Yeah, this one. I was like, I got Scolipede as a Spiker. So I never really needed a Spiker. But no. So low-tier fairies are kind of hard to come by, and I think Diancie's a really, really solid one, especially because it's just eating so many hits. Alright, so let's move on from the Rain team and into the Mega Scizor Coco team. So this team kind of started out a bit weird. This team actually started out as a Regidrago team, believe it or not. I think Tier 3 Regidrago is a steal, and that's why you see it on this team and I think it was this team. Yeah, you'll see it on two of my teams, just because I think a Pokemon that's only real switch-ins are Fairy types and steals that can go fully Spidef invested. Like, for example, Fortress and Skarmory aren't necessarily eating those Dragon Energies from full, even from a Scarf set. It just hits so hard. And you can deal with that fairy thing with this Mega Scizor right here. So your issues with fairies kind of like there's very few fairies that are going to be able to carry the coverage necessary to deal with Mega Scizor, which is going to be your Mystical Fires like your Sylveon. I guess Clef gets Flamethrower. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, Mega Scizor is dealing with almost far and away all your fairies. Not to mention Bullet Punch is outspeeding all of them and killing your fast ones. So I really liked that combo. And then I was like, all right, Mega Scizor, what is Mega Scizor? Like, what is the thing when I think of it? It's like U-turn into Volt Switch. And so I was like, let's get the best Volt Switcher there is, and that's Coco. I generally have struggled to use Coco in the past. the only time I did successfully use Coco was before the DLC came out, and we thought it had close combat, play rough, and like ridiculous amounts of stuff. It no longer has that, so rest in peace the Cocos I was being good with. But yeah, so one of the cool sets that Koku did get, that I think a lot of people sleep on, is a set that lets it beat Nidoking, which is Calm Mind Stored Power. Um, it's a bit of a weird set, and obviously it's going to be niche in scenarios, but you can do Calm Mind Stored Power, Roost, and like T-Bolt, and it has some insane matchups. And obviously Koko's a great Pokemon, and so pairing it with that Volt Switch U-turn momentum is really solid. Not to mention it takes another one of those great fairies off the board for your opponents to snag. And so Roserade is another Pokemon. Spikes, let stuff whittle down. It's also beating those fairies with those Poison Stab, which I think make it a really good Pokemon for this team as well. It's a nice grass type. You don't necessarily need a real bulky grass here, just because you don't want to rely on two of your really bulky mons, that being Mega Scissor and whatever grass type you pick, both being extremely weak to fire. And because you're already taking that Mega Scissor on, you got to find some Pokemon that can take fire hits, which is kind of why Rhyperior and Starmie made the team. Starmie is a rapid spinner. It's fast. It fills that speed tier gap between Coco and I believe Zapdos. Yep. And so it does that nicely and functions as a spinner, taking a lot of that pressure off Coco and Scissor from being that defogger removal for the matchup. So Galarian Zapdos was an interesting mon to put on the team. My way of thinking with adding it was almost like, all right, so what is Coco struggling with? And Regidrago struggling with? That's your like Steel Ground, your Steelixes, your Mega Steelixes. So Steel types was kind of what I was getting at. So I literally go over here and I'm like, all right, Fighting type, Close Combat. What do we got? Conkeldurr. This Pokemon has Ozu Syndrome. Buzzwole. All right, I could consider it, but not super reliable. And then there's like Terrakion, but that's lame, and so we went Zapdos. And also gets that Flying Stab, because Flying Stab is broken in draft. My favorite thing about Galarian Zapdos, which I guess doesn't apply in FPL, is it can do a really mean Urshifu check. It can basically run Helmet, and it's resisting that Dark and Fighting Stab, which not a lot of Pokemon can do, while then also being able to hit back and basically OHKO it. And in theory, outspeed, if you want to run the speed invest for the right set. So I think it's a really phenomenal Pokemon. And yeah, Defiant is awesome because you're preventing defog, so you can keep those spikes up and let Regidrago kind of rip through teams. And then Glaceon, Solid Icemon, Incineroar, Cofagrigus, and Licky we're just kind of rounding out typings almost. I think Incineroar is a solid pick as a fire type. Parting Shot's another great momentum to pair with that U-turn, Volt Switch Core. I guess Starmie also gets Flip Turn, so if you're getting even more of that momentum. Because a lot of this team is about getting in Regidrago, clicking a button, and moving on to the next thing, basically. Just because this Pokemon hits ridiculously hard. And that's the crazy thing about Regidrago, actually, is I like it more than I like Regieleki. Even though Regieleki's in a tier above. And I think the main reason for this is you can actually, like, sort of run a physical Regidrago. Obviously, you lose on Dragon Energy, but you still have Dragon Dance, Dragon Dance, Dragon Claw, Crunch, Body Slam, Explosion. Like, you have options. Outrage. Scale Shot's another good move. Thunderfang. You can hit some coverage, whereas you literally have nothing with Regieleki. And Regieleki's also not eating a hit. So Regidrago can also function as as something that takes a hit. Just being a pure Dragon typing is honestly pretty solid. Only really weak to Dragon, Fairy, and Ice. Which Mega Scissor off the board is eating all of those hits. So you can pretty much not worry about him. And it's taken all those elemental hits. Especially fire types for this team for Mega Scissor. But yeah, this kind of gets more momentum. This is another Spiker, not Spiker, but T-Spiker. And a really solid Ghost that gives a Trick Room element to the team. If you wanted to run Trick Room Regidrago, and you also have Rhyperior, which is another mon that was really thriving under Trick Room. And then, here it's back. Licky. I'm changing it to Audino since I didn't say I said I was never going to see another Licky in the video. I lied. See, Audino. No, I think this team just needed a normal type and another Ghost Resist. I think that's what I ended up going with as it. But no, from the looks of this, I feel like Licky was just on my mind when I was building these teams. But yeah, so that's kind of what I went with this. I think Coco Mega Scissor is a really cool core, and something I really want to try in a future league. Issue is you're never going to really get a chance to draft that because those two Pokemon are going to go off the top 10 or so picks in a lot of drafts. but in like a what's they're called, team draft league where you can kind of build your team from scratch. I really want to use one of those teams. So moving on is Spectre's Delight. That's kind of what I call this team. Whole point of this team is making sure Spectre goes crazy. And so to do that, I said hard hitting fighting move, hard hitting fairy move, darks and normals have been taken care of, and Spectre can go ham. There's a little more in depth than that. These Pokemon fill a nice little speed tier combo. I really like Gliscor. I think it's underrated as tier 2. I think it should easily be a tier 1 mon. And these speed tiers all line up really nicely. Here's where you'll see that I ended up using Berserker as my steel type on a team that's extremely offensive. T-Spikes, Dragalge, also as a dragon type, poison type, taking up those T-Spikes for Spectre and setting them down. So you can run like Subcom Mind Hex sets. Cinderace is filled in the perfect speed gap between Diancie and Spectre. So the speed tiers on this team are phenomenal. I can also court change some hazards away. Rotom, solid grass type, bulky, amazing, like just pivot. And this Pokemon gets flip turn, like all of these Pokemon with momentum. Miltank, Rise favorite, great goes resist, takes it off the board as a Spectre counter. Thick Fats, letting it eat some ice hits. This team's pseudo weak 2 with Gliscor. And what's it called? Rotom and Dragalge and Cinderace not necessarily being a great ice resist. Fighting resist for this team is kind of just Spectre and I guess you have Dragalge and Gliscor. So it's solid. But that's where Dottler comes in, gives you a webs option. I really like this team. But the entire idea was like, all right, Spectre, what do you got for stopping me from spamming Ghost Stab? It's Darks and Normals. Let's get our best answers for those types right on the team and go from there. And so I think this team would just have so much offensive pressure and it'd be a problem to stop. Yeah, so that's kind of where I went with that team. And then on to our last team. And then we can start. I'll probably take some suggestions on teams so we can try and build some together. Is a Weavile Megalop team. Rye suggested this too as a core. And so I was like, all right, I'm in. Like, let's see what we got. And so my first thought was like, all right, if we're going to do Weavile Megalop, the only core that I know they actually like typing wise fit into is a Fighting Dark Psychic core, which is a really popular offensive core that a lot of people don't necessarily take into consideration when drafting their teams. And so to round out that core, the big reasoning behind it is Psychics and Fightings both have a very hard, like, not necessarily very hard, but a difficult time breaking bulky psychic types, and that's what Darks do. Dark types is entirely, like, the entire typing is evolved around beating psychic types. It's immune to them. They came to existence because psychic types were too powerful. And so you pair a dark type with both of those and kind of just let them go in. And so I grabbed Latios, which also fit in that speed tier and also hits like a truck and comes in specially, since both of these Pokemon are physical attackers. And so I really liked that. On top of it having Healing Wish being an awesome utility. And so from there, it was like, all right, what kind of does this team need? Some pivots. Gliscor, best pivot in the game. Once again, I think it should be tier 1, so it's on another team. We have Jellicent and Fortress. Jellicent's a really solid fighting resist. By resist, I mean immunity, which Weavile and Lopunny are obviously both weak to. It's knockoff weak, and that's kind of a thing that I guess this team is sort of small issue with, because obviously Rotom Heat we'll get to later. Once it's boots, Lottie down to a knockoff, Comfey can eat a knockoff, and Fortress can eat a knockoff. But other than that, this thing needs its item until it gets it procced, and then it becomes less of a knockoff issue. Anyways, it can also run just Colbur, and then it's honestly eating a lot of the dark type hits anyways with Wisp and Strength Sap and weakening stuff. I don't know, I have frustration. But yeah, I really like Jellicent on this team. I just kind of fit right in that glue spot. Gliscor is kind of the same way. Fortress was the seal I felt fit best for this team. It gets momentum on Volt Switch while still being really bulky and being able to set hazards just to let stuff like Weavile and Lopunny kind of go in. Comfey was a solid low tier fairy I really liked here. It gets some priority. Calm Mind can set up, can be a cleric for the team. Ariados is a good web setter, gets foul play, which I almost learned the hard way in BFL, but they brought the wrong set, so we take those. But no, I've slept on Ariados for a long time. It's an okay web setter, it can agility pass, slow as dirt, and has absolutely no bulk. Honestly, has barely right to be called a fully evolved Pokemon. Like this is the kind of stuff that needs like a new Mega, like or something. Like what on earth? Like you gave Obstagoon to the Linoon line. Can we at least give Ariados like some Mega Spider? But yeah, this Pokemon stats are garbage, but it gets to get weapon foul play and can do some annoying stuff. So it made it on the team. T-Spikes as well. And then Rotom Heat. So Rotom Heat really is kind of that Volt turn. Lopunny gets U-turn now, and Gliscor obviously gets U-turn. And so it was that Volt switch that court needed. So I really liked that. And then last but not least, Rampardos and Meganium. Meganium was because I didn't want to use Leafeon again. Leafeon works here fine. Gogoat's another fun one. If that's your tickles your fancy or whatever. I kind of want to use the starter. Uh, I don't think this is ever going to come in relevant, so it's just Overgrow. And then Rampardos. This is literally one of my favorite Pokemon. Give me some Rock Polish. You can even feel dangerous. That base 65 attack. That Fire Blast, though. You watch out. Your Ferrothorns beware. Get some sheer force action. Pokemon's crazy. That attack stat. Bonkers. But yeah. So, what on earth? But yeah, so that's kind of how this team ended up. Basically, and we can kind of go back and look at them all in a more grand scheme of things. But this team's kind of built around that top, like, 8 right there. I think all 8 of those will have their moments and matchups. Especially that's kind of the core of the team. Here, your big core is like these 3 right here. These are kind of playing your support. And these kind of round it off. Here, I think it's a really well balanced team. That's kind of my favorite thing about it. Like every single one of these Mons I can see being brought to a match. A lot of offensive pressure. Here's a good fun rain team. Megazam, and then a rebuild of Loopy's team. So yeah, that's kind of what I was going with when I was trying to build a perfect team. If anyone has any suggestions on teams they want to try and see me build or Mons they want to see me use on a team, I'm most definitely down to kind of do that. But for now, I think that's going to be the stream. I'll probably upload this to YouTube later, just so people can watch it and see what they think. But yeah, I'd love to hear some more suggestions on teams. And with that, I think I'm going to call it a night. Yeah, reach out to me via Discord. Same thing on here, Savage145 the hashtag 3091. And yeah, that's it for me for tonight.